Although Nihon Falcom's long-running Ys franchise has always existed well within my orbit, and I've long regarded the series with a sense of curious appreciation from a distance, I had never gotten a chance to actually play an Ys game before, until a few weeks ago when I got the opportunity to dive headfirst into the brand new Nintendo Switch version of Ys VIII Lacrimosa of DANA for the very review you're watching right now. Of course, any game with an 8 in its title, Ys included, can understandably sound daunting if you're coming in with little knowledge of its 7 preceding entries, to say nothing of spin-offs and other non-numbered titles. And this was the exact source of the trepidation I felt going into Ys VIII. If there's a great game here, would I be able to enjoy or appreciate it on the same level as someone who has been following the series throughout the years? Or would I feel like I had been cast hopelessly adrift into a land of unknowns, much like perennial series protagonist Adol Kristen at the start of this adventure? Fortunately, as I quickly learned, it's actually that second question that makes Ys VIII a perfect jumping-in point for series newcomers. Ys VIII begins with Adol and his longtime traveling companion Dogi working aboard a passenger ship called the Lombardia in exchange for passage to distant lands where new adventures await. But after a series of unusual and unfortunate events involving a massive sea creature, the Lombardia is sunk, and its passengers, Adol included, find themselves washed ashore on the mysterious, deserted Isle of Siren. From there, it's up to Adol and his newfound companions to survive, explore the island and uncover its mysteries, and hopefully come up with the means of escape along the way. This fresh slate approach effectively means that no knowledge of Adol's prior adventures is required to enjoy this very much standalone tale. And while the broader strokes of that tale perhaps take a little too long to come into focus, you'll be too caught up in the sheer joy of exploration and rescuing other castaways early on to care. And make no mistake, although the story's pacing in the game's early hours could certainly be improved, there's a definite payoff when Ys VIII does eventually start divulging juicy details about the Isle of Siren's history, as well as the true nature of Adol's dreams about a woman named Dana who seems to have lived on the island at some point in its past. In this way, the events of Ys VIII play out in parallel in a manner that is surprisingly reminiscent of the first half of the TV show Lost. One narrative thread focusing on the castaways and their struggles to survive, and the other focusing on the overarching mysteries associated with the Isle of Siren, with those two threads intersecting more and more often as time goes on. But in a funny way, the game's early hours focusing so heavily on the former to the exclusion of the latter may actually work in its favor. After all, I certainly didn't expect to become so heavily invested in the plights and personal lives of Adol's fellow castaways, and the way they each contribute to daily life at the castaways' home base makes each rescue feel meaningful. For example, a tailor you rescue early on isn't just added to some in-game achievement list as a checkmark. She sets up shop with the help of other castaways, and from that point on can assist Adol and friends by making new clothes and accessories for them, given the proper materials of course. In this way and many others, Ys VIII's gameplay and narrative components exist in rare harmony for an action RPG, with one contributing to the context of the other at any given moment and making the overall gameplay loop that much more irresistible. And that overall gameplay loop can be defined by one key word: exploration. Ys VIII is utterly exploration-driven, to the point where the Isle of Siren itself, in some ways, becomes the game's most important character. The Isle of Siren is gigantic, and the game keeps detailed track of your exploration progress, right down to letting you know exactly how many treasures and resource points are hiding within each area of the island, and, more importantly, how many you still have yet to find. And in true fashion for a game all about exploration, you won't be able to fully explore an area or reach all of its treasures your first time through. Some pathways will remain tantalizingly out of reach until you've returned to an area equipped with the proper adventure gear, Ys VIII's term for unique items that allow Adol and friends to climb vines, double jump, run across the surfaces of swamps, and other actions that turn areas that were once dead ends into avenues for further exploration. And this all happens against the wider context of the game's constant reminders that Adol and his companions in the exploration party aren't just charting the island for the hell of it, but because that exploration is in direct service of finding a way to get themselves and the other castaways off the island. And in a particularly brilliant stroke that further exemplifies this rare marriage of gameplay design and narrative context, overall exploration progress is often gated by natural hazards such as landslides or giant boulders that require a certain number of castaways working together to clear. So every time you find and rescue a new castaway, you're slowly working toward being able to explore further reaches of the island in a way that feels organic and realistic, to say nothing of the direct effect they'll have on gameplay as they begin carrying out their assigned role back at home base. It goes without saying that exciting combat, slick controls, and overall playability are vital components to any good action RPG, and I'm happy to report that Ys VIII succeeds marvelously in these areas. The combat in Ys VIII is fast, furious, and punchy, taking a surprisingly arcade-like approach that, among other things, challenges you to dodge or parry dangerous enemy attacks at the last second to activate a brief, bullet time-esque bonus period that leaves enemies wide open to an assault of your own. There's more to it than just last-minute parrying and dodging, though. Adol and his friends each specialize in one of 3 attack types, and many enemies are weak to only one of said types, encouraging you to switch the party member you're playing as early and often, which you can do at the press of a button and without restriction. Each character also has unique special skills that can be mapped to the 4 face buttons, and because these skills draw from a shared pool of skill points for the entire party that is constantly recharged by landing regular attacks, combat in Ys VIII quickly settles into a rewarding rhythm of finding new ways to link regular attacks and special skills together, dodge canceling your combos, and switching targets as you flit around the battlefield to avoid enemy attacks. Simply put, Ys VIII does not want you to conserve your skill points and special attacks for boss fights and emergencies like so many other RPGs and action RPGs might. Instead, because your skill points are almost always recharging, Ys VIII encourages you to use your full repertoire of abilities early and often, as well as find ways to link various special skills together into even more damaging combos. Meanwhile, healing your party is generally handled via the item menu, allowing each character's special skills and the general flow of battle to focus on offense, offense, offense. Even though it would be fair to assume that Ys VIII's gameplay might start feeling repetitive when stretched over the game's estimated 50 hours or so for a standard playthrough, that is refreshingly not the case here. Part of that is owed to the raw strength of the arcade-style combat and slick controls, but Ys VIII also takes great pains to sprinkle brand new gameplay mechanics and gimmicks like raid battles, monster hunts, fishing, night exploration, and other surprises throughout the entirety of the adventure, and not just during its opening hours, which helps keep things feeling relatively exciting and fresh even at, say, 35 hours in. Unfortunately, despite all of my praise in this review thus far, it isn't all sunshine and rainbows for Ys VIII. If you're the kind of player for whom minor details are important, then Ys VIII may drive you up the wall with its profound lack of polish when it comes to its English script and localization. Even with a seasoned editor on staff, some games might sneak through to release with a few minor typos and other text oddities, and that's okay. I'm a pretty reasonable guy, and even as someone who formerly made a career out of text editing, I don't demand total editorial perfection from my games. But Ys VIII's English script is a continuous carnival of problems, from myriad obvious typos to improperly formatted text, repeated words and lines, subtitles that don't match spoken dialogue at all, and even lines that made it into the game only partially translated. It's just a mess, and the fact that Ys VIII's English script could make it into the game in such an unpolished and unprofessional state just defies understanding. But even if you can look past the significant localization problems, and I believe most players probably will, there is one more polished issue to consider that is specific to the Nintendo Switch version of Ys VIII. Unfortunately, Ys VIII is an absolute poster child for the ever-present power versus portability argument that quite often rears its head when porting multi-platform games over to the Switch. To state things quite plainly, I played the PlayStation 4 demo of Ys VIII back when the game initially released in the West late last year, and the hallmarks of that demo experience, performance at a rock-solid 60 frames per second with the buttery smooth gameplay and combat that implies, are nowhere to be found in the Switch version. Not only is the Switch version's performance cut in half to 30 frames per second alongside a noticeable downgrade in textures and overall graphical fidelity, the game often struggles to maintain even that level of performance, with camera sweeps and especially hectic fights often resulting in things getting rather choppy. These dips in performance are always temporary, and 30 frames per second is certainly maintained most of the time, but the dips below that happen often enough that you'll never quite forget about them. Strangely, these performance issues seem to happen more often in TV mode than in handheld mode, making the Switch version of Ys VIII more suited to portable play than anything. The Switch version is still perfectly playable in TV mode, mind you, and that's how I personally spent most of my time with the game for this review, but if you own multiple platforms and see yourself playing Ys VIII at home more than on the go, I'd recommend the PS4 version over this Switch port in an instant. Still, being able to explore such a huge, exciting world in a portable format with solid performance and graphics that still look quite good on the Switch's screen is its own unique draw, and the good news is that's about the only compromise you're likely to find between the Switch and PS4 versions. Falcom's sound team, for example, is known for its consistent delivery of some of the best soundtracks in the business, and that's certainly true of Ys VIII no matter which platform you play it on. Hayato Sonoda and Takahiro Unisuga know exactly what kind of driving melodies players want to hear when exploring and fighting their way through the Isle of Sirens' diverse locations, and those kinds of more traditional Japanese RPG soundtrack offerings are counterbalanced nicely by the wailing, screaming guitar riffs that are hurtled your way during boss fights and other important battles. The English voice acting, meanwhile, is a lot better and more competent than you might expect in light of the poorly localized script, and never once did I feel compelled to switch to the Japanese voice track. Ys VIII Lacrimosa of DANA is a great action RPG that is likely to satisfy fans of the genre while serving as an ideal entry point into the series for Ys newcomers. While the Switch version trades in more performance and visual fidelity than I expected would be necessary for portability, and I do feel the game could have been further optimized for play in TV mode, the way Ys VIII so elegantly marries its heartfelt narrative of mismatched castaways learning to survive a mysterious island together with the practical gameplay demands of exploring and fighting your way through said island is rather special and refreshing. It's for those reasons, not to mention the punchy, arcade-style combat and sharp controls, that I want so badly to say that I love Ys VIII, and in many respects I do. But I simply can't look past the shockingly raw and deeply unprofessional lack of localization polish that pervades the entire game, and that combined with some early game pacing issues means that at the end of the day, I like it a lot, and as long as you don't need your games to dot every I and cross every T, literally in this case, I'm confident in recommending Ys VIII Lacrimosa of DANA to anyone looking for a quality action RPG fix on the Nintendo Switch. Hey, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and follow us on social media using the links in the video description below. Otherwise, keep it on GameXplain for more on Ys, the Nintendo Switch, and all things gaming.